Shalom, everyone. Today we're going to pick up where we left off in Matthew 24. We left off in verse 8, I believe. So let's turn there. Like I didn't mark, or like I didn't leave it marked. Matthew, turn. It's Mark. Let's see. Matthew 24. Okay, I'm going to just read a few verses because I really don't anticipate us getting very far today. I don't think we're getting very far today, so I'm going to go to Matthew 24. I'm going to pick it up in verse 8. And then, well, let's just read through verse 14 for now, shall we? Let's see. Yeah, verse 14 for now. If we need anything to go past verse 15 or past 14, we'll read it when we get there. How's that? Matthew 24, pick it up in verse 8. All these are just the beginning of sorrows. They will deliver you up to tribulation and kill you, and you'll be truly hated by all nations because of my name's sake. And then many will be offended and betray one another, and then will hate one another. Many false prophets will arise and deceive many. And because lawlessness will abound, the love of many will grow cold. He who endures to the end shall be saved. And this gospel of the kingdom will be preached in all the world as a witness to all nations, and then the end will come. Okay, so, question. My first question is, before I go into anything I have, does anyone have any thoughts or questions about the passage we just read? Yes, David.
Going back to the questions that the disciples asked him, I then first want to identify which one of the questions is he answering with these passages. Because they asked him, when is the temple going to be destroyed? When is his coming? And when is the end? So which one of those three apply to this? In my opinion, I think it's the second.
You think it's what?
The second.
The second. And which question was that in the second
When
question?
when is his coming?
When is it coming? Well, that's a good question. At this point, when is it coming? Because he's not giving a time, is he? He's not setting a date. We read that. If we drop down to Matthew 24, remaining in Matthew 24, we drop down to verse 36. But of that day and hour, no one knows, not even the angels of heaven, but my Father only. There's a similar remark in Acts 1, verse 7. Now, let's see. Acts 1, verse 7. Acts 1, the apostles are talking with Joshua before he ascends into heaven. Verse 4, picking it up in verse 4, and being assembled together with them, he commanded them not to depart from Jerusalem, but to wait for the promise from the Father, which he said, you have heard from me, for truly John baptized with water, but you shall be baptized with the Holy Spirit not many days from now. Therefore, and come together and said, Master, now at this time restore the kingdom to Israel. They're still itching, they still don't understand. Verse 7, he said to them, it is not for you to know the times or seasons which the Father has put under his own authority. So we still don't know. He didn't set days. At this point, we still have only the Father knows. Not even Joshua knew. Got to remember, after his resurrection, he'd made his ascension into heaven. got to see the Father again, and he still didn't know at this point. Even Joshua didn't know. Q, I think I saw your hand up.
Yes, sir. I do like the fact that David pointed something out with the kingdoms, and how you're saying nobody knows the day nor hour. If we look at just verse 8, me and David were just talking about this briefly earlier. It talks about sorrows.
Mm-hmm.
What are these sorrows? There's personal, and then there's the godly sorrow that we are to experience in this world. If we would look at Luke 22, verse 44 through verse 46, it talks about how Yeshua went out to pray and found Peter, the disciples, sleeping for their sorrows. And we are instructed in the parables of Mark and Luke 12, we're to wait for the master.
Right.
So with that being said, we're to stay awake and alert and not to fall asleep because of our sorrows. And in Revelations 16, 15, and chapter 3, verse 3 also mentions, blessed is he who stays awake, or in other translation, he who keeps his garments. That's just, I just want to bring to what David was saying and to what you were saying with nobody knows the day nor hour. That regardless, we're to stay awake and not to let our sorrows to keep us asleep.
That's right. Anyone else? Lisa?
In speaking about the sorrows that Q is referencing there, in the Strong's Greek Dictionary, that word means a pang or throe, especially of childbirth, pain, sorrow, and travail. So in the pangs of childbirth or the sorrows of childbirth, it continues to get worse and worse and worse. You may not know the minute and the hour that child is coming, but you know it's coming. So the same way for here, the beginning of those sorrows, you know that eventuality of the kingdom coming is going to come to actuality.
Yeah.
Yes, David.
That perfectly aligns with when they asked him the question. They didn't say when are you coming. They asked him, what shall be the sign of
Sign.
And so just as Lisa mentioned, the sign of a child is about to come is the sooner and faster and quicker pains of labor until the childbirth happens. So he's giving them the answer that they asked for.
Larry?
Also, we'll cover this later in this chapter, but in verse 32 it says, but learn the parable of the fig tree. When its branches become tender and it puts out leaves, you know that summer is near. And so we're in the latter stages of winter here in North Texas. And like we got out to get into the car, and I noticed some of the bushes that lost all their leaves are now putting little green leaves on. And some of the trees I noticed in the neighborhood are starting to have little green leaves bud out of them. So that tells us very soon that there will be full-blown spring. So as Joshua is giving this illustration in the 24th chapter about all the things that would take place, yes, he said no man knows the day or the hour, but we know the coming season. And when we start to see these things to start to take place,
We know to watch for the signs, yes.
we know to watch for the signs.
That's what he tells us. Anyone, oh,
Yeah, I was just thinking, we're seeing rumors of war and wars.
mm-hmm.
And so, as opposed to Deuteronomy's blessings and curses, we still walk in the Torah, we still keep our nose to the grindstone, we look for his, and then we have to live with it, watching out for the demise of these things in the earth. It's really yucky before the new thing comes, isn't it?
Yes, it is. It's going to get real yucky.
And we have to live in that
I like
faith
the
of
way
the
you said
blessings
that.
and cursings, and we have to look for the signs at the same time and not get discouraged. So I'm just kind of thinking out loud, that's all.
No, I mean, that's true.
Okay, Raquel?
Yeah.
Raquel, then Q.
Yeah. I mean, along those lines, when it talks about many will be offended, will betray one another. If I go to Mark 13:12, it's kind of very specific. Now, brother will betray brother to death, and a father his child, and children will rise up against parents and cause them to be put to death. And if you go to like Luke 21:16, you'll be betrayed even by parents and brothers, relatives and friends, and they'll put some of you to death. So it's gonna come very personal. It's gonna come to your family, right? Our family.
Very personal.
Yeah, very personal. It's not just out there. It's
No, it's going to
It's
get
gonna be the
real
house.
close to home.
gonna be, yeah, exactly.
I'm sure a lot of us had that experience to one extent or the other. Okay, Q?
And just to piggyback off of what Raquel said and Larry, also in Luke 21:36, it says, "Watch ye therefore, and pray always that ye may be accounted worthy to escape all these things that shall come to pass and to stay before the Son of Man." So therefore, we are instructed to always, stay awake, stay alert, and be watchful. And Yeshua, or the scriptures, gives three accounts, like just to name off a couple verses. 1 Kings chapter 18, verse 46.
Yeah, I had that in my notes. We'll be going there in a bit, but go ahead.
2 Kings chapter 9, verse 1. 1 Peter chapter 1, verse 13. And Matthew 25, verse 1 through 9, gives you three accounts of where we are told to be three examples of readiness, which is one is keeping our lamps burning, two being dressed for action, which is, I'm guessing that was the scripture that you have in 1 Kings, and being prepared for the master's return.
So, because verse 8 we're being taught here, this is, everything we've read up to this point, this is not the end of the matter. This is just the beginning. Things are getting warm, just getting revved up. We're just, revving the engine a little bit. It's just the beginning. Anyone else? Okay, let's try verse 9. Let's talk about verse 9 for a few minutes. Because I like the expression that was used, names about the fur I go that I really did like this expression about things getting yucky. And all the sorrows begin. We get a lot of details about these sorrows and all the minor prophets. Rather than go through them all for the sake of time, I'd refer you to them, but they go through them in a lot of detail. We could talk for weeks just by going through all the details found in all the minor prophets. Joel, Zechariah, Zephaniah, Nahum, all of them. Joel, Micah, Malachi, all of them. They're full of detail about a lot of these sorrows coming up. And the closing of Ezekiel is about, it details a lot of them too. The closing of Ezekiel, we read places like Ezekiel and Jeremiah. Some nations will have hardly anybody come through them. That's how bad. Of course, that's a testament to how this is. Let's go to verse 9 and back to Matthew 24. Let's read that a few minutes. Let's read that. Talk about that a minute or two then. They will deliver you up to tribulation and kill you, and you will be hated by all nations for my name's sake. Many will become offended and betray one another and will hate one another. Raquel touched on a good point. Yes, this is going to come very close to home. It's not going to be just out there and we're going to hear about cases here and there. Oh, we'll hear about them. But we will actually, it's going to come very close to home. Because this came very close home to me. In point, now I was never betrayed to death or prison or anything, but when I began my walking, I received my call and began walking this way, my dad and I had a very serious falling out. And as time went on, it went from bad to worse. He dug in his heels to the day he died. Yes, Larry.
One thing to consider too, the things that Joshua is telling us in Matthew, the 24th chapter, these things he's going through are a nearer image of what he gave to John in Revelation. And in the 6th chapter of Revelation, beginning in verse 9, I'll read verses 9 and 10. This is the opening of the 5th seal. And it says, when he opened the 5th seal, I saw under the altar the souls of those having been slain for the word of Yahweh and for the witness which each had. And they cried with a great voice, saying, until when, holy and true Master Yahweh, do you not judge and take vengeance for our blood from those dwelling on the earth? So this is the opening of the 5th seal, because again, when we go back and look at, you know, what was the first thing Joshua said in Matthew, it corresponded with the first seal. Second, third, and here we're talking about the martyrdom of those who would be sacrificed because they held up to Yahweh's word.
That's true. Anyone else? Okay, Lisa?
And in Revelation 12, where it's talking about the woman, the child, and the dragon, there's an interesting scripture, the way it's worded here in Revelation 12:11.
Okay.
And it says, and they overcame him by the blood of the Lamb and by word of their testimony, and they loved not their lives unto the death. So we may all be put in that position where we have to choose our life or our love of Yahweh, but we want to make sure that we don't love our lives more than Yahweh. I thought that was interesting the way it was worded.
Okay, Larry?
Also, 2 Timothy chapter 3, verse 12, it says, likewise, all those desiring to live a righteous life in Messiah Yeshua will be persecuted. So, you know, when the apostles, you know, they basically said to Yeshua, we'll follow you to the end. And he said, rightly so, you will be. And every one of the apostles died a horrific death except for John, who died of old age. And so, you know, as you pointed out, when you came in the walk of starting to serve Yahweh, you were persecuted by your family. And each one of us, once we have taken a stand for different things, we all face different trials and tribulations. So if you're facing trials and tribulation in your life because you're in this walk, then you're on the right path.
Yes.
I just wanted to add to that. I'm looking for it in the Aramaic translation of by the blood of the Lamb and the word of his testimony, not our testimony. Is the difference between the Aramaic.
Yes.
Which
But we
I
have some
really
examples of this too. Anyone think of one? I seem to recall a guy named Stephen in Acts 7. Let's turn there very quickly, please. Rather than read the whole chapter, it comes, let's just fast, here we'll back up to the closing verses of Acts 6, actually. Pick it up in verse 8. And Stephen, full of faith and power, did great signs and wonders amongst the people. And there rose some from what is called the synagogue of the freedmen, that is, the Cyrenians, Alexandrians, and those from Cilicia and Asia, disputing with Stephen. And they were not able to resist the wisdom and the spirit by which he spoke. So when we're given this kind of testimony, this kind of spirit that was just brought up, I'm sorry, I forgot your name again?
Shannon.
Shannon. I don't know why I can't remember that. Shannon. That Shannon just brought up. When the people that are combating with us if will not be able to resist this. They will not be able to refute it. And they will have but two choices. So we read about both of them in Acts. They'll be cut and gnashed to the teeth. Now, the example we read of from Peter when they're cut by this, when people are cut by this, is they seek repentance. In the case of Stephen, they get very angry and put him to death. Let's keep reading in Acts 6 momentarily. They were not able to resist the wisdom and the spirit by which he spoke, and they secretly induced men, saying, "We have heard him speak blasphemous words against Moses and Elohim." And they stirred up the people, the elders, the scribes. They came upon him and seized him and brought him to the council. That is the Sanhedrin. And they set up false witnesses who said, "This man does not cease to speak blasphemous words against this holy place and the law, for we have heard him say that this Joshua of Nazareth will destroy this place and change the customs which Moses delivered to us." And all who sat in the council looked steadfastly on him and saw his face as of the face of an angel. He had this special glow of aura about him, if you will, kind of like what Moses did when he came down off the mount. Johannes, did you have your hand up? Oh, I'm sorry. He gives his testimony, and we'll fast forward to verse 54 in Acts 7. Then they heard these things, then they were cut to the heart, just like they were in Acts 2. But this time it's different. Different outcome. They gnashed at him with their teeth, but he, being full of the set-apart spirit, gazed up into heaven and saw the glory of Yahweh, and Joshua standing at the right hand of Yahweh. He says, "Oh, look, I see the heavens opened up and the Son of Man standing at the right hand of Yahweh." And then they cried out with a loud voice, and they stopped up their ears, and they ran at him with one accord, and they cast him out of the city, and they stoned him. And the witnesses had laid down their clothes at their feet of a young man named Saul. We're going to get to him too. But he's going to be on both sides of this, by the way. I think most of us already know that. And they stoned Stephen as he was calling upon Yahweh. And he's saying, "Master Joshua, receive my spirit." Then he knelt down and cried out with a loud voice, says, "Master, do not charge them with this sin." When he said this, he fell asleep. And anyone else have any thoughts or ideas they'd care to share? Yes, David.
Yeah, I'm glad you shared that, because what I was going to say is trying to look at this from two different angles. The other angle is if someone says, "Oh, that was just back then. They were delivered up, the disciples were delivered up and they were killed," or the disciples were, brought towards the councils of the synagogue, that's not going to happen to us. That he's not referring to his coming by this applying to us.
Right.
But
So
if we think about it from a spiritual standpoint, anytime somebody questions you about your faith or challenge you on what you're doing to be right, they're trying to deliver you up to death, spiritual death. They're trying to bring you before the council and question you and make you prove your faith. And, number one, if the set-apart spirit is in you, you don't even have to worry about what you're going to say. He's going to give it to you.
Mm-hmm.
But it's more of a spiritual attack, a spiritual bringing you forth as opposed to actual physical. Not saying that they're not going to bring us before the leaders to make us prove what we believe, but we have to take it in context. And the context now is we're challenged every day to being brought before a council.
Johannes.
The key to this, Yeshua said it be for his name's sake. And then the verse that Larry just read, it's for the word of Yahweh, when he said in Timothy, So that's the start right there. So what David's saying is right. That word persecuted, we always look like, oh, someone's chasing after you to beat you up. But that word persecuted there, it also means just like to be put out or banished.
Mm-hmm.
How many people in here have been put out, kicked out of organizations that you cannot welcome here anymore? That's persecution. And they're not putting you out for any reason. It's for the name's sake. When people like, I've been reading this, Yahweh has a name, because there's groups that keep the Sabbath and feast days, but you better not bring up the name of Yahweh. And if you do, they banish you, they put you out.
Mhm.
He didn't say it was going to be for a righteous council or for anyone that represents him. It could be anybody. It could be government, yes, but it's also, because all these groups have councils, they got, or, you know, a leadership of some sort, and they get together and they mark you and put you out, and then that isolation, they don't want other people talking to you either, you know. These are the things Yeshua was talking about. And so when you look at the words, he's, you know, a lot of times we start getting, you know, that tunnel vision and think it's only one thing, but it's all these things. And we also have to realize that those he's talking about, it has to be for Yahweh's name, for his name's sake, for Yeshua's name's sake. And he's clear on that, because there's a lot of things that go on and people are like, oh, look, see this is happening, that's part of the word. It's not. Are they suffering for Yeshua's name's sake, for righteousness, for true righteousness? And so that's the measure as well for us, part of that not being deceived, to see things for how they really are.
Tino and Q.
Yeah, I was gonna say that's that's right. And when you look at this account with Stephen, you can see from the beginning they put false witness on him, and that's a lie.
Mhm.
So he, in this passage and all these passages in chapter 7, he spoke the truth. So that's the whole thing. It's the lie versus the truth. And he died for speaking the truth. Like Johannes had pointed out, Yeshua is the truth. And so when we understand that, we understand that when we speak that, and like David was saying, you know, the Spirit gives, when it's time to say something, the Spirit's going to give you words. Yahweh will put the words, the right words in your mouth to speak it if he wants it to be said. I don't really like to quote a lot of quotes, but there's one quote that always stood out to me. It goes like this. It says, the truth is incontrovertible. Malice may deride it, ignorance may attack it, but in the end, there it is. I think that was Winston Churchill that said that. And it always stuck out as saying the truth. It's always about the truth with a capital T, not your truth, but the truth. And the truth belongs to Yahweh. So it's interesting how, in this account with Stephen, it totally lines up.
Q? Q, do you have a hand up? No? Okay. Larry then?
In John chapter 16, beginning in verse 1, Yahshua said, and I have spoken these things to you so that you may not stumble. For they will drive you out of the assemblies, but an hour is coming that everyone killing you will think that they are offering an offering before Elohim. And they will do these things to you because they do not know the Father nor me.
Right.
And so, you know, we, just as Johannes pointed out, we all came out of different organizations that claim to worship in spirit and truth, but yet, once you say, hey, I believe that the Father's real name is Yahweh. By the way, it's used over almost 7,000 times in the scriptures, and really the name that was given to Miriam, or Mary, before the birth of her virgin, her virgin birth of her child, was not Jesus Christ. It was Yahshua. But you bring that out in church assemblies today, and they will be very upset, okay? They will ostracize you or not talk to you, or like Johannes pointed out, they'll ask you to leave. And we've seen times past where these people, just like in Stephen, they were put to death. And there was many times that through history where people stood for the Sabbath and for the divine name, and they were persecuted until some of these people literally went out of existence. They were murdered.
Anyone else? Okay. We still got a few other examples we could stand to look over. In terms of, because this actually goes to the very beginning. Let's check out Cain in Genesis 4. This goes to the very beginning. This is not an old or a new concept, not a new teaching, not a new event. It's actually this goes all the way back to Genesis 4. For the context, let's pick it up in verse 1, shall we? Now Adam knew wife. Adam knew Eve, his wife, and she conceived and bore Cain, and said, I've acquired a man from Yahweh. She bore again, this time his brother Abel. And Abel was a keeper of the sheep, but Cain was a tiller of the ground. And in the process of time, it came to pass that Cain brought forth an offering of the fruit to Yahweh. And Abel also brought the firstborn of his flock and of their fat. And Yahweh respected Abel and his offering, but he did not respect Cain and his offering. And Cain was very angry, and his countenance fell. Yahweh said to Cain, well, why are you angry? And why is your countenance fallen? After all, if you do well, will you not be accepted? And if you do not do well, sin lies at the door, and its desire is for you, but you should rule over it. So Cain goes to talk about it with his brother Abel. Now Cain talked with Abel, his brother, and it came to pass when they were in the field, that Cain rose up against Abel, his brother, and he killed him. The same pattern, isn't it? And then Yahweh said unto Cain, where's Abel, your brother? And he said, well, I don't know. Am I his keeper? And he said, well, really, what have you done? The voice of your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground. Yahweh knew what had happened. Now, specifically, we're not told here in this passage what Cain and Abel discussed, what they talked about. However, when we look at the pattern in the scriptures about what's been spoken about, the divine speaking, about giving testimony, about speaking the truth, it's the same pattern, isn't it? We can reasonably assume, we can reasonably learn or suspect, whatever, I'll let you choose the word, we can reasonably ascertain that something of very similar occurrence happened in this conversation. And it cut Abel, and he made him mad, and it killed him. Just the same way it happened with Stephen, same way it happened with Joshua, and many of the prophets as well. So this is a very old pattern. Yes, Shannon?
Oh, it's just mulling over. It's not just the truth, it's the way and the life.
Mm-hmm. Yes, Larry?
And it's interesting, we know that the first lie in the garden was the serpent to Eve. The second lie that I can catch in the scriptures is Cain, because Yahweh, who was the Yeshua in his pre-existence his pre-existent form, okay, because he was actually talking to him. So we know it was Yeshua who came in Yahweh's name, asked him, what happened? Where's your brother? And he said, I don't know, like you said, am I his keeper? Well, he lied. He lied straight up. And, I don't know if obviously the gift he was trying to make at the sacrifice, I don't know if it was just a lame sacrifice because of what kind of sacrifice it was, vegetables, or was it truly because of his heart condition?
No, it was his heart condition. It was his attitude.
It was his
he tells
attitude.
him, sin, where he's wanted sin. Let's read that again. He didn't, verse 5, he did not respect Cain and his offering, and Cain was very angry, his countenance fell. So Yahweh said to Cain, why are you angry? Why are your countenance fall? If you do well, will you not be accepted? There's our answer to the eternal question that seems to be going about this passage. If you do well, will you not be accepted? And if you do not do well, sin lies at the door. In his case, what was the sin? Anger, malice, murder, violence. I mean, we can only think of how, just in that very little short context, we can think of how many commandments that Cain broke just in this little passage. Yes, David.
Yeah, and we just basically apply that to today, if we walk in righteousness and walk in truth, it is going to offend others. It's gonna offend those that don't want to walk in righteousness. It's gonna offend those that don't wanna know the truth and wanna stay in their current state. And it might be to the point to where they want to lay hands on you and do something bad to you. But we wonder why, you know, we try to live our life the right way, we try to do right, and it just rubs people the wrong way for some reason. And they don't know why, but sin lies at the door to the point to where they wanna not either be around you or they wanna stop you from doing what you're doing so that they can feel better about what they're doing.
I've had a few people tell me that. David, I'm sure you have too. I'm sure every one of us have had someone tell us that.
Hey, Curtis.
Yes, Q.
I actually have a question.
Go ahead.
Excuse me. Towards the point that David made. As going back, just to pull back real quick, going to verse 8, Matthew 24, verse 8.
Okay.
This is going to be the beginning of sorrows. I was doing my study and it said there's two types of sorrows. There's personal and then there's godly sorrow. We would want to experience godly sorrow because it's what keeps us on the path. So according to what David was saying, if I'm not mistaken, but according to what David was saying, does that mean what David was saying, would that refer to personal or godly sorrow?
Well, we have to define those
Yeah,
two
we have to
things.
define those two
Define
things.
godly sorrow, because
Yeah.
we're having a hard time understanding.
Well, people are going to be in a lot of sorrow over the side of things they see coming and things that are happening at the end of this age. Let's turn to Revelation 19. I think we can get an idea of what kind of sorrows we're talking about here.
Where? Revelation 19.
Mm-hmm. Excuse me, 18, not 19, it's 8, Revelation 18. Revelation 18, let's pick it up in verse 9, shall we? It's about the fall of Babylon, and the world's mourning the fall of Babylon. Listen, I think it's just going to give us a taste here. The first 8 verses of Revelation 18 outline and put a little fast forward on this, on all the sins of this Babylon the Great. Picking up in verse 9. The kings of the earth who committed fornication and lived luxuriously with her will weep and lament for her when they see the smoke of her burning, standing at a distance for fear of her torment, saying, Alas, the great city Babylon, that mighty city, for in 1 hour your judgment is come. And the merchants of the earth will weep and mourn for her. Here we go, this weeping and mourning, crying and stuff. No one will buy their merchandise anymore. The merchandise of gold, silver, precious stones, fine linen, purple, silk, scarlet, every kind of citron wood, and every kind of object of ivory, every kind of object of most precious wood, bronze, iron, and marble, cinnamon, incense, fragrant oil, frankincense, wine, oil, fine flour, wheat, cattle, sheep, horses, chariots, and the bodies and souls of men. As today we would call them slaves. And the fruit of that your soul longed for has gone from you, and all the things which you are rich and splendor have gone from you, and you shall find them no more. And the merchants of the earth of these things who have become rich by her will stand at a distance, fearful for her torment, weeping and wailing. I think that's the kind of sorrow we're talking about. At least in part. Anyone else? Remember, in the context of Matthew 24, this is just the beginning of it.
Yeah.
David.
Yeah, just trying to circle back to Q's question of the two types of sorrow. I would give a different name for those. There's worldly sorrows, in which you just mentioned.
The worldly sorrows.
They're sorrowful for the worldly possessions that they are going to lose at his coming. And then there's more of a spiritual sorrow. That's when you truly go through tribulations and tests and trials. And not only yourself, but for others, when you see them going through those tests and trials, you feel sorrowful, but you know that the time is near. You know that Messiah is coming. So it's a different kind of sorrow. You're not being sorrowful for material things, but you're being sorrowful that everybody's being put through the spiritual tests that they're going through.
So it can be individually and collectively as well.
Right.
And it is a spiritual sorrow. And it's a test of which way if we are going to turn. Are we going to kill the messenger like they did in Acts 7 and other places? Or are they going to turn and repent like they did in Acts 2 with Peter's message? Larry.
Yeah, there in Matthew the 24th chapter, there's at least 3 instances just in this chapter where Yahshua said, do not be misled. See that no man deceives you. He's talking about a man. Then twice more in the chapter, he talks about false messiahs and false prophets that will rise up and will give great signs and wonders. So when we go to Revelation the 18th chapter, and it's talking about Babylon the Great, what is Babylon? Well, the kings of the earth, they have committed fornication with her. So it's not a king or a kingdom that is Babylon the Great. Then it talks about those the merchants of the earth weep and mourn over her because, there's a lot of commerce given. Well, it's not the merchants of the earth, okay? Then it talks about all her luxury and everything that's happened to her, okay? And once this Babylon is done away with, okay, in verse 24 of chapter 18 it says, and in her was found the blood of the prophets and of the saints and all the ones having been slain on earth.
Mm-hmm.
And so, really, Babylon the Great is none other than the empire of false religion, okay? That's what it is. And so there are religions around the world claim that they worship the Father and the Son, but yet they have indoctrinated false demonic teachings that they propagate, and they've led nations to war. They've blessed, look at World War I and World War II, the Germans and the Americans on both sides, the religious entities of those nations at that time sent their children into war against one another. Baptist against Baptist, Catholic against Catholic, And so we can see that this great harlot, this detestable thing, is full of blasphemous things, and they commit fornication with the world. And so it really goes hand in hand with Matthew the 24th chapter, the 3 different instances where Yahshua is telling, do not be deceived.
He warned them 3 times in this passage. Don't be deceived. Don't be deceived. And by the way, don't forget, please don't be deceived. And what do people do? Now, of course, we don't have this problem today, right? People, they take this to heart, right? No. Not a chance. We got people deceived by people just coming in their own name and their own say-so. And they're expert on all the coming conspiracies and everything. And all they have is, what? Do they have massive credentials that they have the ability to present to the world? No. They don't even have the spine and the backbone to put their real name and their face on it. All they have is their say-so. And I personally know people who have fallen for this. And I mean even people of this walk in this way. They've fallen for it because, well, they said so. And I get no pleasure in saying that. I don't. But it's a warning of things to come. And it's happening just like we were warned. Yes, Raquel?
No, I was just gonna say, like, during that time, and, a chapter before, Babylon was the whole Pharisees and Sadducees, their belief and their religious spirit, right? That's why he went through so many woes, and it's basically telling them that, it's all about letter of the law. I say that because we still have that religious spirit, right? And it just kind of creeps up because we don't, need to, it's very subtle, it's very subtle. So we always have to be alert and make sure that we're following the weightier matters of the law.
Q?
Yes, I actually want to pose my question around two accounts. One being the rich young ruler who went to Yeshua and was like, "Oh, you are good," and he was like, "Who is good other than the Father?" He's like, "I keep the commandments," and he tells him to let go of his riches, right? So we're basically told to leave all our things, or to just follow Yeshua. The second count is where Yeshua was giving the actual parable of the master returning in Mark. Can't remember exactly, but he even says, I noticed the key word he was talking about, cock crowing. And then when they left to the city, he actually said, "Hey, Peter, you're going to deny me 3 times before the cock crows." And Peter still did not get it.
No, he didn't.
And it just it's kind of getting to me where I'm like looking at the scripture where we're reading it and so we're looking at it and we're saying, "Hey, do not be deceived." But my question would be like, are we any better than Peter to say, and are we high and mighty to say, "Hey, we're not going to get deceived," even though you had Peter who was with Yeshua and he still didn't get the whole point.
That's right.
So, it's just, I don't know.
Well, just one comment on that. There's a difference between someone trying to deceive you and you deceiving yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And so a lot of times, and FYI, I'm gonna talk about this next, when we are through our ignorance or through our disbelief deceive ourselves, that's a whole different matter than somebody coming to you saying, "Hey, what about this? Hey, what about that?" and trying to pull you away from Scripture. So I think those are two different scenarios.
You're right.
Johannes?
And the two he mentioned, Yeshua didn't command people to give up their livelihood and things like that. He told that man, because that man had set himself up like, "I've done everything."
Yes.
He was like, well,
His own words judged him, yes.
if you're gonna be perfect, because Yeshua knows our weakness. He knows where we still have to grow, and this man need to grow. So that was for that man. He didn't address the crowd. He was speaking to that man what he needed to do to be perfect before Yahweh. And obviously, Yeshua knows what he's talking about, because what? The man went away sorrowful. That was still something he had to overcome. Just because Yahweh says you have to be willing to relinquish something doesn't mean you actually have to. Abraham was willing to relinquish his son. He didn't have to. He didn't have to go through with it, but he was willing to. Mm-hmm. And that's why Yahweh told him, "Now I know he fears me." That's that word is actually bad. I mean, he's telling him, "Now I know that Abraham will not hold anything back from me. He's willing to give me everything." And so we have to have that heart within us to be willing to do it. That doesn't mean we're actually going to have to do it. Yes, some have. I'm not saying that we won't. Some have, but the thing is to have a heart willing to do it, because some did it for the wrong reason. Some people martyr themselves. "Oh, look how much I'm suffering. Look, I'm really suffering for." You put yourself in that situation. So it's not about the act, it's about the heart within.
It's not the heart,
That's
yes.
what Yeshua said, spirit and truth, as was mentioned earlier. And then the other thing with Peter didn't say he wouldn't be deceived. He was just telling to Yeshua that, "I love you so much, I would never turn on you." And once again, Yeshua was pointing out not a fallacy, but just that the heart is willing. He even said that. There's a script. The heart is willing, but the spirit is weak. Mm-hmm. Peter meant it. In his head, he meant it. But what Yeshua was showing, he said, this is easier said than done. Because when pressure is put on you, look what happened to Peter. And he was a disciple. He was with Yeshua 3.5 years. And if Peter can be in a situation where he can falter, that's what Yeshua is showing all of us. We all can, which is why we have to go to him. And of course we know Peter came through stronger, and he went through that, and you could look at his writings to see how dedicated he was to Messiah. And so that is a lesson for us, that even with the real intention, we cannot do it in and of our own power. We have to rely on Yahweh to do that. So before we're like, "Oh, this is great, this is a great way, this is a great walk," like Shannon put out, it's the walk of life. This is life. But we should never come to feel like I got this thing all figured out, that we have to continue to stay in constant prayer and seeking Yahweh to help us to serve Him, to obey Him, to live and to be like Him.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Okay, David, then Raquel.
Yeah, I was laughing
Mhm.
to myself.
Oh.
I find it a small irony that the rock crumbled under pressure
Yeah.
3 times.
Right,
So,
right.
if we gotta be more focused, we gotta be more, and it's not like, oh, through the rest of my life, I can't stumble, I can't
Right.
fall, and I can't crumble. It's, I know I am, because I'm human, but I need to rely on Yahweh to bring me through and pick
Right.
me up when those things happen.
Right, because look at Peter's response. He wept bitterly.
Mm-hmm.
He knew he had messed up, but he didn't give up. He did what David just pointed out. He repented, obviously, he came back, he got up, he continued on. He didn't just throw his hand up like, oh, I failed, Yeshua was right, and so that's what we must do, like David said, when we do stumble, to remember that we have to ask Yahweh for this, to lift us up and bring us on.
He didn't have the big picture yet.
Right, he was still learning.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
Raquel, then Larry.
Yeah, no, I was just gonna mention, I mean, they bring up really good points in terms of, to me, righteousness, you're not really righteous unless you're righteous under pressure, right?
Right.
And I've just kinda experienced that at work. There's this person that I've known for a long time, and, full of integrity, right? And then, there's a situation where he's dealing with David, and he was under a lot of pressure, and he was just like lying. And he was just lying, and I'm like, I know, because my husband told me, right? And I'm like, oh my gosh, he just crumbled, And I'm like, I know that pressure he was under, right? And he crumbled, and I was just like praying to Yah, when I come under that pressure, that I don't crumble. But I see, how, a good person that you would say just crumbles under pressure. So righteousness, you're not righteous unless it's under pressure, once it's tested.
So I was thinking what Johannes was talking about, Peter stumbling 3 times, but yet after Yahshua's resurrection, he asked Peter, do you love me? And he said, yes, I do. And he asked him again, do you love me? And by the 3rd time when Yahshua asked him, do you love me? Peter was grieved. And he said, Lord, you know I do. Or however he said it, okay? But at that point, Yahshua told him, feed my sheep. So, 3 times he denied Yahshua, and Yahshua came back 3 times and verified that he loved him. Then gave him an assignment.
Mm-hmm. So far we've between the notes I've had up here, and I think we've had covered both persecutors and the persecuted. And we have another one in this account of Kings. That's Jezebel having an old pattern continue. That's in 1 Kings 19. First Kings 19, pick it up in verse 1. If we back up to verse 18, or verse 8, chapter 18, we have Elijah's, several of the prophets, they had this, for lack of a better phrase, this big prayer meeting up on Mount Carmel, and Elijah has all the prophets, Jezebel's prophets all killed. And Jezebel's not real pleased about this. Picking up 1 Kings 19, the context was that. And Ahab told Jezebel all that Elijah had done, how he had executed all the prophets with a sword. Because a lot of the people, some of the generals, when they saw the miracle, they killed all the prophets of Jezebel. They were 450. If I remember correctly. Jezebel sent a messenger to Elijah saying, so let my mighty ones do to me, and more so, if I do not make your life as the life of one of them by this time tomorrow. He saw that, and he rose and ran for his life, and he went to Beersheba, which belongs to Judah, and left his servants there. But he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness, and came and sat down under a broom tree, and he prayed that he might die. It's enough. Now, Yahweh, just take my life, because I'm no better than my fathers. And as he lay and slept under a broom tree, suddenly an angel touched him. He said, "Get up, rise and eat." So, and he looked, and by his head was a cake baked on coals, a jar of water, and he ate and drank, and he lay down again. The angel Yahweh came back second time, touched him, and says, "Get up, eat, because the journey is too great for you." And he arose, ate, drank, and he went in the strength of that food 40 days and 40 nights as far as Horeb, the mountain of Elohim. We see Elijah running for his life on account of what he had done at Mount Carmel. And of course, it's going to take a few chapters over, but eventually we see the death of both Ahab and Jezebel over this and other sins which they had done. We see prophets being persecuted, some to blood, some to not necessarily to blood. I have a few other scriptures, but I think some of y'all already touched on some of those, so I'm not going to repeat them. Like the ones I got in Revelation, I think that they've all been touched on and covered on. My audience has covered these already. So anyone else have any thoughts or questions on where we're at in Matthew 24? There's an interesting thing about Paul. Paul's an interesting case. Now, what makes him so interesting? He was on both sides. When he first enters the scene, he's one of the persecutors. And we read this account. Let's go back to Acts, please. Let's just see what Acts has to say about this. He was still called Saul at this point. Acts 8, verse 1. Now Saul was consenting to his death, that is, Stephen. At that time, a great persecution arose against the church that was at Jerusalem, and they were all scattered through all the regions of Judea and Samaria, except the apostles. And devout men carried Stephen to his burial, and they made a great lamentation over him. But as for Saul, he made a havoc of the church, entering every house, dragging off men and women, and dragging them into prison. Let's try a couple pages over. Then let's start in chapter 9, verse 1. Then Saul, still breathing threats and murder against the disciples of Yahweh, went to the high priest and asked for letters from him to the synagogues of Damascus, so that if he found any of who were of the way, whether men or women, that he might bring them bound back to Jerusalem. And as he journeyed, he came near Damascus, and suddenly a light shone around him from heaven. And he fell to the ground, and he heard a voice saying, "Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me?" And he says, "Who are you, Adonai?" And then Yahweh said to him, "I am Yahshua, whom you are persecuting. It is hard for you to kick against the goads." So he, trembling and astonished, said, "Master Adonai, what do you want me to do?" Now here it is, this master Pharisee, advanced in all his ways, above all his peers, and several of his seniors as well. He says, he has to ask the question, well, what do you want me to do? This Torah master asked me, what do I do? Then the master said to him, okay, arise, now go into the city, and you will be told what you must do. And the men who had journeyed with him stood speechless, hearing a voice, but seeing no one. So they had their testimony. They weren't just watching Paul go crazy here. You know, like you see on the Twilight Zone and other TV shows, when someone just suddenly goes crazy and people just watch them, they don't know what. They heard the voice too. They didn't see anybody, it says, but they did hear the voice, and they knew he was addressing Saul directly. Then Saul rose from the ground, and his eyes were opened as if he saw no one. He got up blind. They led him by the hand and brought him into Damascus. And he was 3 days without sight, and he neither ate nor drank. Any questions or comments on this? Because we've still got a few other words about Saul. This time, remaining in Acts. Let's go to Acts 22. We're going to read verses 6 and 7. Acts 22, 6 and 7. Paul's giving a defense of himself. This time he's in front of a council. Not as one of the accusers, but now he's one amongst the accused. He's not the persecuted in this case. He is one of the persecuted, not one of the persecutors. Roles have switched, haven't they? Reversal of roles. Acts 22. Let's pick it up verse 1, because this is quite the confession, actually. Let's pick it up in verse 1. We're going to read the first 6 verses. Brethren and fathers, hear my defense before you now. When they heard that he spoke to them in the Hebrew language, they all kept more silent. And he said, so he was speaking to them in a language they perfectly understood, in Hebrew. He said, I'm indeed a Jew, born in Tarsus of Cilicia, but brought up to this city at the feet of Gamaliel. So he studied at the feet of Gamaliel, one of the more higher learned ones. The scribes of the Pharisees, the feet of Gamaliel. Taught according to the strictness of our father's law, and he was jealous toward Elohim as you all are today. And I persecuted this way. Here's where his confession begins. I persecuted this way to the death, binding and delivering into prisons both men and women. And as also the high priest bears me witness. So even a high priest has witness of this. He's not making this up. He's pointing out the high priest could attest to this. And all the councils of the elders, from whom I also received letters to the brethren, went to Damascus to bring in chains, even those who were there to Jerusalem to be punished. He was going to drag them in chains. And now as it happened, as I journeyed and came near Damascus over about noon, suddenly a great light from heaven shone around me. So now he's telling the story of his conversion on his way to Damascus. Let's drop down to verse 22. Remaining in Acts 22, let's drop down to verse 19. So I said, Master, they know me that in every synagogue I imprison and beat those who believe on you. And when the blood of your martyr Stephen was shed, I was standing by consenting to his death. He was giving his stamp of approval, consenting to his death and guarding the clothes of those who were killing him. Then he said to me, "Depart, for I will send you far from here to the Gentiles." Let's try again in Acts 26, shall we? A few pages over. And we will begin in verse 12. Again, here's Paul testifying to Agrippa. "While I was thus occupied, as I journeyed to Damascus with the authority and commission from the chief priest." So he had the priest and the high priest's commission to do this. He was deputized by the religious leaders of his day. "As I journeyed to Damascus with authority and commission from the chief priest." It's not just describing the Pharisees, but from the priests, the chief ones. We're talking like the high priest and his sons is who we're talking about specifically. "At midday, O king, along the road I saw a light from heaven, brighter than the sun, shining down around me and with those who were journeying with me. When we all had fallen to the ground, I heard a voice speaking to me, saying to me in the Hebrew language, 'Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me?' It's hard to kick against the goat." He says, I said, "Well, who are you, Master?" And he said, "I am Joshua, whom you are persecuting." From there, he goes on to give the account of what happened about his new commission now. For your old commission, your old job, you're fired because you're being hired for a new one. Now, verse 19 is interesting here because can we please pick us up in verse 19, remaining in Acts 26? "Therefore, King Agrippa, I was not disobedient to the heavenly vision." That's why he's there, because he's doing what he's been told. "But declared first to those in Damascus and in Jerusalem and throughout all the region of Judea and then to the Gentiles, that they should repent, turn to Yahweh, and do works befitting of repentance. And for these reasons the Jews seized me in the temple and tried to kill me." Just like he had done? Yes. He, in fact, was on both at different times, but he was on both sides, the persecutor and the persecuted. He was dragging men and women off from synagogues and the temple to Jerusalem in chains to be punished, just like he was here. Any question or comment? Because I think we're nearing to be out of time. Yes, Raquel.
I just want to read, Matthew 5.
Go ahead.
Yeshua was talking, it was on the Sermon on the Mount, and how he started pretty, slow, I guess, with poor in spirit, but how he ended it with, "Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when they revile and persecute you and say all kinds of evil against you falsely for my sake. Rejoice and be exceedingly glad, for great is your reward in heaven. For so they persecuted the prophets who were before you."
Anyone else?
I'm not quite sure, as I question the word all the time in my understanding of it.
Okay.
But as far as spiritual sorrow, Romans chapter 8,
Okay.
when it says, "Through the Spirit do mortify the deeds of the body, ye shall live. For as many as led by the Spirit of Elohim, they are the sons of Elohim." And it talks about the bondage and the spirit of adoption, and all the way down to, "Because the creature itself also shall be delivered from the bondage of corruption and the glorious liberty of the children. For we know that the whole creation groaneth, travaileth in pain together until now, and not only they, but ourselves also, which have the first fruits of the spirits, even we ourselves groan within ourselves, waiting for the adoption to wit, the redemption of our body."
Exactly.
So it's not, I wish it was a computer program where you can say delete, 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 and save, and you got a whole nice, but it's moment by moment, it's issue by issue, it's.
Learning one
Precept
thing at a
by
time.
precept,
That's
one
right.
at a time. But it is sorrowful when those things you lived by have to die. And sometimes it's a groaning before you see, and sometimes it's lived and presented in a test. And you walk it out, and hopefully you pass, and then there's another sorrow. Yeah.
It's only the beginning.
Well,
And that actually almost ends up where we wanted to kind of close out with, but he that shall endure unto the end, the same shall be saved. We have to endure unto the end. I did have one more, verse 12. Verse 12 says, and because iniquity shall abound and love many shall wax cold. I was reading a reference verse here, which is Deuteronomy 28:54. And Deuteronomy 28:54 says, so that the man that is tender among you and very delicate, his eyes shall be evil towards his brother, towards his wife, of his bosom, and towards the remnants of his children. And so if I try to picture that today, that's the attack on the family dynamic right now.
mm-hmm.
And so that love waxing cold could be the separation and division that the adversary wants to do in the family dynamic.
Okay, well, we'll close here. We made it through three verses today.
Yeah, we got more than that.
We got 3 verses today.
We're speeding up now.
8, 9, and 10. See, was it 10?
No, we finished and
Oh, well, we did do 11. Did we do 11?
kind of got down to 13, almost 14.
Well, not exactly, but in any case, we'll close here today. The bulk of the discussion was on 9 and 10, but in any case, let's close here today. We'll break, and David will be back up here for the main message at 3 o'clock.